So Scott, we're talking with Scott Johnston here at the Dublin Web Summit. The March of the Cloud, you guys recently commissioned some research whereby there's an intrinsic link between companies' rate of growth and the rate of cloud adoption.
That's correct. It's really interesting. I think what we've seen is basically a couple key components of getting into the cloud that really drive this. There are three main things. One is all your content's safe. So you have now, companies they're not losing things, disks aren't going out, those kinds of problems go away. Second, they can get to their information from any device and from anywhere. So it gives them a flexibility with how they work. And then the third is it's really easy to share. So all of a sudden things that were quickly, that were emailed around and you didn't have the right version or someone updated them are now something that's centralized. And so what we see is we see ideas flowing faster, we see consensus reached much quicker than ever before. And so I think that's our sort of thesis for why we think we're seeing the people who adopt cloud growing so much faster.
And is it down to things like collaboration? Because I would have been familiar with things like Google Docs in the early days, and amazing classes of 300 or 400 students working on a single doc, for example. But I always think about things like workflow and how you manage the flow of a document between people. Is there a case for making workflow more obvious to people, or is that already happening by its own self?
It's happening by itself. I think workflow has classically been very enterprise focused and often very confusing because it's not a natural, it hasn't been integrated in a way that I feel is natural. But we're seeing, as we get broad adoption, we're seeing a lot more of this that we can build in the product in a natural way. So we have Google Classroom. Google Classroom allows teachers to post assignments and then students to turn those assignments in. There's an entire workflow built in just for them, so it's not something where they're having to understand a workflow tool, it's that their workflow is built into this process of assignment, grading, returning, submitting, and so I think those are the kind of things you're going to see cropping up. We also have great partners that have enabled things like that through Google Apps, and I think we're going to just see both of those areas grow, where key large verticals we're adding into the product, smaller ones, third parties are using our APIs to integrate.
Just thinking back to the question of companies growing, and I'm thinking it's really down to economies of scale and the ability to do things you just couldn't do before. I saw a photograph doing the rounds recently of people in the 1950s trying to load up a 1 megabit drive into the back of an aeroplane, and I think it was an IBM drive. But the actual, it's really about economies of scale. You can actually run businesses at a scale you never really could before, enabling people to have access to things. All they need is a smartphone, a computer, they connect to the cloud, and suddenly they're collaborating. They don't need fax machines, they don't need any of these things anymore. It's all there.
Yeah, and I think you're right on. I think I remember my first startup back in 97, 98, where I remember just this mail server being the biggest pain to me. It would go down, all of a sudden sales started emailing around large PowerPoints and it crashed, we got hacked. And so I think the way I think about it is what these tools are allowing a business to do is focus on what they're trying to do and not these tools that get in the way of them getting their purpose, getting to their purpose. And so I think that is very freeing for them. And the interesting thing is we're seeing broad adoption. You go to somewhere like the UK, where 60 to 70% of startups are using this, or Boston, we've got over 90% penetration in the startup market. And those are classically forward-looking businesses. But then we just announced yesterday that Jaguar Land Rover is adopting this Drive for Work for, it's like 29,000 workers, 26,000 workers. And so I think it's not just these early adopters, but we're also seeing companies much larger scale. PwC last week announced that they were going to use it internally and also resell it. So I think that's whether you're a huge company or you're a small startup, it's broadly applicable to what you're trying to get done.
What amazes me is just how perfect these services are for something that's still only so new. How do you improve on perfection? Like, if it's already perfect, that you can store stuff. I mean, what's next?
I think we still have a lot to do. And I read a study about, I think it was from Harvard Business School, where like a feature or a new thing needs to be 9 to 10x better than the old thing. And so we've still got some work to do there on, for example, on getting it better, making sure it's better than local storage in all ways. There's lots of ways it is now, but we need to cover a bunch of ground there. We also have, users giving us a ton of feedback, and I think that's what's most fun about the Google scale is we just get such a massive feedback that it's really easy to pick out patterns and see things that go wrong very, very quickly. So I think it's far from perfection in my mind. It's part of my job is to not, to see all the problems with it. So we've just got a long way to go. And I think as the kinds of things I think you'll see is right now, computers to date have kind of been something where the computer itself, you have to ask, you have to sort of conform to the computer.
It did what you told it to do.
Right,
yeah.
And I think what we're focused on now is how do you suggest and assist people with what they're trying to do. So when you go to a meeting, you should have the 3 to 4 docs that you need for that meeting, and they should already be shared with the people you're meeting with.
Kind of like a Google Now for what you need when you arrive at a meeting.
That's exactly it, yeah. And I think Now is a great example of a broader theme, which is it should just be at your fingertips. And that's really where we're going with Drive. And Gmail and Inbox, which we just released last week, is how do we help people be ready for things and be prepared for things without them having to ask.